opción de audio original. We are about to start, just a couple of seconds. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Maribel Rodriguez. I am going to moderate today the first joint session between ALTA and WTTC. I am the responsible of membership and commercial, the Senior Vice President for WTTC. I'm delighted to moderate this webinar on the future of travel and tourism in the Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have registered more than 600 participants that are they will be coming along as we speak, for more than 20 countries from Europe, USA, and even from China. So good night for them. This webinar will be recorded and available afterwards. Please note that this webinar is in English with interpretation to Spanish. For this, your screen in the bottom, there are two options. If you would like to hear it in Spanish, please click the option at the bottom and mute the original audio. Si desea escuchar el webinar en español, por favor, haga clic en la opción español y silencie la opción de audio original. If you have questions and for the Q&A section, you can use the Q&A option also at the bottom. Now we are going to be looking at the agenda for today. Please, if you can help me sharing it. Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this is the agenda for today. At the opening, we will have Mrs. Gloria Guevara, President and CEO of WTTC, and José Ricardo, CEO and Executive Director of ALTA. After that, we will be having Mr. Harckham, which is the VP and Managing Director Aviation for ICF, who is going to help us setting up the stage. And after that, we are going to be starting a panel, a very interesting panel with leaders, with CEOs, where we are going to be discussing about the topics that we are having today, which is the future of travel. Now, let me invite and present Gloria Guevara, the President and CEO of WTTC. Gloria will provide an overview and an outlook of the travel and tourism situation worldwide and for the region. And as well, she will speak about all the work that WTTC is doing to advocate in behalf of the global travel and tourism sector. Gloria, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Maribel. Can you hear me okay?
Very well indeed.
Very good. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from around the world that are joining this initiative. First time that we're working in this session with ALTA. I'm quite excited, and we have great speakers that you will learn from all of them. What is the current situation, and most important, what is the path for recovery? Greetings from London, and we put together a quick presentation to share with you our global view, and later you'll hear from ALTA, as Maribel mentioned, and then set the stage so that we can hear from our experts and the panelists. If we move to the next slide, really quick, especially because we have a lot of people from around the world, and I wasn't sure how familiar you are with WTTC. We represent the global private sector. A little bit over 200 CEOs from around the world are our members. Here you have probably some familiar faces, all industries from airlines, airports,
Paul, si te puedes acercar un poco al micrófono, escucha un poco lejos.
Better? Cruises, Adolfo, I can hear you. I don't know if that was for me or for who else. So yeah, OTAs, GDSs, car rentals, and every single industry within the ecosystem is represented at WTTC. We have 30% of our members in America, 30% in Europe, 30% in Asia, and 10% in the rest of the world. Currently, our chair is Chris Nacetta. He's the CEO of Hilton Worldwide. He's the chairman of the organization. And we have regional vice chairs. The North America vice chair, as you have here, is Arnold Dona from Carnival Corporation. We have a vice chair for Latin America, Alex Osaya from Apple Group. And we also have, as you hear, have a vice chair for China, Jane Sun, JTV, Tagawa for Japan, and then of course, Europe, Value Retail, Desiree Bollier, and in the case of Middle East, Paul Griffins from Dubai Airport. So very strong representations from the leaders that help us to shape the future and speak with one voice with governments from around the world. Next slide. Besides representing the sector, as this organization was created a little bit over 30 years ago, we do a lot of research. We have done research for 185 countries from around the world for the last 30 years, and we quantify the impact of travel and tourism. It's very important to say that we quantify the total impact, not only direct and indirect, the total contribution to GDP, and that's how we know that 10% of the global GDP, that's a contribution from travel and tourism. A little bit over 330 million jobs around the world, that's 1 out of 10. And as you can see in the graph below, the green line represents the growth of travel and tourism. For the last 9 years, we have outpaced the growth of the economy. And last year, of course, was not an exception. We grew 40% more, which was 3.5 versus 2.5. Here you have the mix between the contribution between international and domestic, and of course, business and leisure. The most important number from this chart, or the one that I like to always highlight, is from all the jobs that they were created in the last 5 years, in all the industries and all the sectors around the world, from healthcare, financial services, technology, all the sectors, 1 out of 4 were in travel and tourism. 1 out of 4 jobs, new jobs from the last 5 years were in our sector. Now, let's move to the next slide. Here we have some data for the region. As we quantify, as I say, 185 countries around the world, we also have some regions. And here you will see we have, for instance, the Latin American region, the Caribbean region, and Mexico. We count that as part of the North America region. And here we just split it for the benefit of the audience. For Latin America, the contribution for travel and tourism is 8%. Last year, we had some challenges. As you will see here, travel and tourism unfortunately didn't grow at the same pace than the economy. Multiple reasons, but Latin America had, some countries had great years, like a great year, like Colombia, for instance, and Peru, but some others had some challenges. Then in the case of the Caribbean, fantastic year. These are figures again from last year, 3.4 versus 1.9. So travel and tourism pretty much is driving the growth of the Caribbean. And as you can see here, while the average in the world is 10%, for the Caribbean it's almost 14% the average. In some countries more, in some countries less, but it's 14% and 15% of employment. Mexico is a country that has been investing in tourism for years, and is 15% of the total GDP, the contribution. Again, this is total, it's not only direct and indirect, and this number might be a little bit different with the number that sometimes we hear from the governments, because some governments quantify direct and indirect, and some others also quantify induced. For us, we quantify total, as we need to use the same methodology from the satellite account to compare apples to apples. In the case of Mexico, travel and tourism grew almost 2%, when unfortunately the economy had no growth. So it's thanks to travel and tourism that actually we had that, because without counting travel and tourism, unfortunately, probably the numbers of the economy were not as we had no growth. Moving to the next slide, you will see also that at WTTC we have doing a lot of work in terms of quantifying the impact of this unfortunately situation, this totally unprecedented crisis. We started talking about 50 million jobs lost, then we went to 75. Currently, 121 million jobs have been impacted globally. 121 million jobs, 6 million in Latin America and the Caribbean of the 121. Now, unfortunately, 3.4 trillion American trillion dollars is the loss so far. And we have a worst case scenario or a downside, which it looks like we're heading in that direction, because of the coordination, what's happening among some leaders and countries is not ideal. And as I'll explain that in a minute, from 121, it seems that by the end of the year, that number can grow to 197 if we don't get the right support, if we don't make the right decisions. And from 3.4 trillion to 5.5. Now let's move to the next slide. And that's just to put it in context. Now, besides economic impact, we also do research in a lot of other things. And one of our 3 priorities has been for years, crisis, learning from crisis, managing and making sure that we are prepared. last November, we released a report where we analyzed 90 different situations for almost 20 years. And it's very important here to highlight lessons learned so that we don't make the same mistakes, and we also repeat the good decisions that we have made in the past. And from these 90 situations, I would like to highlight only 3 in this case. The report is available in case that you would like to download it a certain time. It's in our website. Basically, the 3 lessons are 9/11 is the first one. 9/11, the recovery was very slow. Why was that? Because many reasons, but the most important reason is every country worked in silo and implemented their own safety protocols, their own screening and security protocols. And that lack of consistency created a lot of uncertainty, and it took us longer to rebuild trust from the traveler. Unfortunately, that was a very slow process that had a huge impact, and it took us years to recover. Now, another situation that we have to learn was the financial crisis that, as you remember, it started in 2008, late 2008, and the impact was felt in 2009 in most of the countries. However, we recovered in a very short time frame, with on average 18 months, because that's when the G20 platform was created and the public and private collaboration was unprecedented. We worked very closely and very well, and that speaks about the benefit of having this coordination. Last is the other outbreaks. From the 90 situations, there were 11 outbreaks. SARS, MERS, and Ebola were some of those. Now, why we were able to travel without a vaccine after SARS, MERS, and Ebola? Because we were able to isolate the people infected. Now, yes, COVID is different, 80% asymptomatic, and that's why, learning from those cases, we can travel as long as we can isolate the people infected, and that's to testing. Testing is the one that is making the difference in some countries versus others. Now, let me show you in the next slide what I call the U shape and the V shape. If you look at the chart on the left side, that's the world. The last 20 years, the GDP growth, as I mentioned, the green one is travel and tourism. The white is the economy. As I mentioned before, for the last 9 years, travel and tourism has outpaced the growth of the economy. Now, you will see 2 crises that we had a significant impact globally in travel and tourism: 9/11, and of course, the financial crisis. One was a V shape, what we call. The other one was a U shape. The U shape was the lack of coordination that I mentioned before, the multiple protocols, different protocols, and different standards. The V shape was this coordination that it was unprecedented, that we were able to recover in a short time frame. Now, when you look at the G20, it's very similar than the world. So if we can get the G20 leaders to work together, hopefully we can get that V shape that we had in the financial crisis. Now, I want to also highlight the case of China. If you look at the bottom, this is China from 2000 to 2019. Fascinating what they have been doing, investment in infrastructure and all the things. But I want to highlight also that China had multiple outbreaks. They had experience with SARS, for instance, and others. And as you will see there in 2003, they were able to recover in a V shape, which is interesting because when we look at the first outbreaks, it took us 34 months, and the last one, it took us 10 months. So what it means is that the China, in this case, the Chinese government already has a lot of experience, as they were able to recover pretty fast from SARS, as you will see there. And also in the case of COVID, they have already recovered 85% of domestic. So some interesting lessons coming up from Asia. And as you will see here, it's possible to have a V-shaped recovery if we do the right thing. Now, moving to the next, very interesting, we put together these 4 principles, that these are the 4 principles very important for the recovery. And if you can help us to amplify this message, it will be appreciated. The first one is we need to have a coordinated international approach to reestablish operations. Yes, countries can be closed, and most of the countries decided when to close and for how long. But once they decide to open, it needs to be in a coordinated way. From reopening borders, for instance, it's very important to do that in a coordinated way, because if we do that in silos, it's going to be very painful for the country. It's going to be very painful for the millions of people that depend on this sector. We have seen some corridors, for instance, that they have an alignment in the case of medical tourism and political, and this was announced in Australia and New Zealand. But we believe it's very important to have a coordinated approach to reopen borders and also to remove barriers. We don't believe in these travel advisories, especially because some of those are very political. We don't believe in the quarantines. We believe in testing. And as long as we don't have this coordination, it's very complicated to have insurance. It's very complicated to have several other things. So this is where we need the governments to work together. The second one is when we look at the seamless traveler experience, the seamless traveler journey, we have come a long way. And we're seeing through COVID that the agenda, the digital agenda has been accelerated. Biometrics, very important. And I'm sure that we'll be hearing from our experts as well, the touchless, the implementation of biometrics for the countries that they have done it, they will have a competitive advantage for sure for the recovery. Now, there are two phases, before the vaccine and after the vaccine. After the vaccine is going to be easier. We will continue with the same experience and probably will include only once you have the vaccine a certificate in your reservation. Before the vaccine, we cannot afford to not travel. We need to continue traveling. I was in Greece last week, and I can tell you it was a great experience. Heathrow Airport had an amazing implementation of protocols. British Airways did a fantastic job with the protocols as well. And the government of Greece is implementing testing on arrival. At the beginning, it was for everyone, now it's randomly. So before the vaccine, we need to include the health component, which is the testing in the experience. And we need to use the technology. We need to use biometrics, the touchless, and we need to use the apps for contact tracing. And that would help us as well to recover faster. The third one is the adoption of the global protocols. We need to learn the lesson from 9/11 and don't make the same mistakes. And that's why we at the private sector work together in an unprecedented initiative where we work with more than 120 leaders, corporations, to put together some protocols, learning from our experience. For instance, the hotels that offer rooms in New York, Spain, or Italy as an example, and we're able to maintain those rooms COVID-free. That expertise and that knowledge was included to define the protocols for hospitality. And the point here is that we need to offer some consistency to the traveler so that we can rebuild trust. I was able to see that consistent experience, as I say, last week when I went to Greece, and that was good because it helped to rebuild trust. Last but not least is the continued government support. Very important. The countries that they are helping the most, the private sector and the SMEs and the large organizations in terms of fiscal terms, liquidity or protection to workers, or even investing in promotion, are going to be the ones that recover faster. So these 4 principles are very important. We share them with the G20, and we're sharing with the more than 150 governments that we're talking every day. Next, really quick, is the protocols that I just mentioned. When the travelers start asking us, how can we identify who has implemented these protocols, we announced a stamp. To tell you the truth, the stamp originally was going to be only for us because the protocols were defined based on the guidelines from CDC, WHO, and the participation from our members and the entire global private sector. And it was going to be for the travelers so that they can go to Expedia, TripAdvisor, or any platform and see if the protocols that they have are at the level of the global private sector. But then some governments ask us, can we use your protocols? Can we have exactly harmonized approach and use the same and give us the stamp? And since then we say, well, if the goal is to rebuild trust, why not? And then we have been giving the stamp as a recognition. It's not a certification. It's a recognition that these destinations have implemented the protocols at the same level than our protocol. So far, we have a little bit over 90 destinations and 90 more in the pipeline. Here are some names. Recently, last week was Ecuador. The first one that received was Cancun and the Quintana Roo, for instance. So you see here, a lot of destinations have received so far, and not only in the region, but all over the world, this stamp as the recognition. Next slide, pretty much I was asked to share and this is almost the last part of my presentation, some learnings from Europe, some positive and some negative experience, because we believe that we need to make a point about not repeating the same mistakes. So some positive cases is the measures that they were implementing to slow down the spread, including, for instance, masks, wearing the mask, physical distance, were very effective in some countries in Europe. Reopening travel also within the EU was a great case because they decided to open at the same time. the EU from Brussels led the way. And within all the countries from the EU, they open all together instead of opening in corridors and just, for instance, between Germany and Austria. No, they decided to open with all the members. Good testing examples: Greece is doing testing on arrival, Iceland is doing testing on arrival. The countries that have done more testing, not only to the symptomatic, but asymptomatic, are doing better than the ones that they are not doing testing. Great public and private coordination. We have seen the example of Portugal, for instance, ahead of the game. The coordination has been fantastic in all the things that they have implemented. And of course, the financial support. Germany, excellent, the support. Even they have supported Lufthansa. The UK supporting the workers. France also supporting the sector. Italy, Spain, great initiatives in the financial support. And every country within their own possibilities. Some things to learn from the experience in Europe. Unfortunately, when the virus was in China, we didn't anticipate. We thought that that was going to happen only there. And the reality is that we didn't prepare. And that's a lesson learned. We need to make sure that we do a better job preparing for the future. The same situation happened in the US, by the way. They saw the situation in Europe and they thought that it was going to happen only in Europe. I know it happened in America, in the US, and then in Latin America. Latin America did not prepare, unfortunately. When they saw what was happening here in Europe, I cannot say that they were fully prepared in the entire region, unfortunately. And that's something that we need to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. In some countries in Europe, we haven't seen that public and private coordination, and unfortunately, that is impacting. And the last one also is the fact of having a coordinated plan. It's very important also to have this coordinated plan and the efforts. We are seeing the quarantines. Those are not good. They are in silos. They are impacting the recovery. And the most important region of the world in terms of size is Europe. And the most important season is summer. And I can tell you, we were not able to recover in the summer as we would hope. Last summary of all my presentation, next slide, please, Adolfo, basically is that we have to work together. We need to work together on this recovery to build the travelers' confidence and to eliminate the travel restrictions. Building travelers' confidence, as I say, is through protocols, is working with governments so that we can have a consistent approach. If they ask you to wear a mask in the plane, it has to be in all the flights. If they ask you to wear a mask in closed space, it has to be in all the closed venues where you cannot have that social distance. We need to have a framework for testing and contact tracing. And we need to, the sector, take an ownership and gather testimonials. Very important, the testimonials, so that we can spread the word. As I say, it is okay. I went to Greece with my family and it was totally fine. And I had a good break and a great time. And I'm going to travel again next week. I was wearing a mask. I follow the protocols and I follow the advice so we can resume travel. And then we have to work together in eliminating these travel restrictions, replacing the quarantines. The quarantines, they don't help because they are saying that we all are infected and we all have to be in quarantine, what is not the case. If some people are infected, they need to be put in quarantine, but not 100%, because that's going to impact the recovery and that's going to have such an impact also in jobs and unfortunately in the whole thing. We need to look at international corridors like New York and London, or for instance, within Latin America, perhaps we can look at Colombia, Panama, Peru, I don't know, Chile, Argentina, or within Mexico and the US and others. And of course, this needed trusted framework where the governments are aligned. If I have a test before I leave London and I go to Latin America, I would hope that the test is going to be accepted in the country that I landed. That's this framework that is so much needed. So thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to take it back to Maribel, and hopefully this was interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you. And I remind everyone that please, if you have a question, there is an option in the bottom which is for the Q&A. I will be delighted to share afterwards with Gloria. Now let me invite José Ricardo. José Ricardo is the Executive Director and the CEO of ALTA. And José Ricardo will be presenting today the perspective of the aviation industry in Latin America and the Caribbean. So Ricardo, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maribel. It's a good morning for everyone. It's a great pleasure. I mean, actually, depending on where you are, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to us from ALTA to be here with you for the first time. We've joined forces with WTTC in this complex moment for everyone. We have been in the market for 40 years, and before I start giving you some information about ALTA and data, please let me introduce you our executive committee, where the president is Mr. Pedro from COPA. And also in our third slide, please, next one, you can see our members, our full members, affiliate members, associate members, and ALTA partners. And the idea to give this for you, or to show this for you all, is just to assure you that we have been working hard, and we have been working together in order to find a way out of this moment that we have been passing through. So with the next slide, please. Our idea is to give you an overview of our sector, especially when you talk about Latin America and Caribbean. But before we go, please let me take a step back to show you a little bit about our region. What is this region? How was this region before everything happened? We're talking about a region where the sector traveling and tourism, as Gloria said, generates more than 17 million jobs and was responsible for about 8% of GDP in this region. But especially when you talk about Panama, when you talk about Caribbean, and when you talk about Mexico, we're talking about 15% of GDP. We're talking about a region that was expected to grow 5% per month when you talk about our flights. And also, just to give you an idea, we're talking about a region where last year, for the first time ever, was connected with the whole regions in the world. I mean, that was amazing. But what happened actually? There's a poem here in Brazil called The Middle of the Road. And actually it says that in the middle of the road, there was a stone. And in our case, our stone was the COVID. So everything changed so quickly that we had to put the whole industry and the public sector together to find a way to survive. And we will for sure. But when you see the moment at the COVID started in our region, we lost about 97% of our passengers. And just to give you an idea about what this number means, can you go for the next slide, please? When you talk about that we lost about 97% of our passengers in April, I'm saying that flew only a little bit more than 1 million passengers in our regions. These are the same number that we had in 1960s. So is the impact of the COVID in our region and for aviation was tremendous. But in June, the market is slight recovery because of Peru, Ecuador, and some Caribbean countries, markets restarted operations, which means that, of course, with the whole safety, it's very important to resume the flights. And that's our job as ALTA. That's what we have been trying to work with the government and also with our partners. And I say that because the losses, according with AERA, the losses in our region could get about 18 billion in revenue because of the COVID. And I'm just talking about the Latin America and Caribbean. So next one, please. And what about our projections? Of course, we're going to find a way out. I truly believe that we have been working together, and I actually, the way that I see was the first time ever that would be possible to put together the private sector, the society, and the public sector to find a way to keep us moving. Of course, not gonna be, I wish Gloria would be like a V process, but it's gonna take a while for us, and we are expecting to recover the same number that we had in 2019 in 2025. And of course, domestic is going to be about 6 years, and international about 5 years, a little bit more than that. But the way that we see the problem with this recovery is that some factors contribute a lot for that. Like we had, before the COVID in our region, we had some countries already with economic problems. But when you talk about the airline, we didn't receive the financial support to recovery. That's why we tried to find another way out. We called that we had two grids to work on. One of that was to work with the government to try to receive some financial support. But we understand that they have so many problems that wouldn't be possible to help us with that. So we try in another way. Please, next slide. And this one was to talk about the V factor and the W. Gloria have already said. Please, next one. So what happened is that if we resume the flights, our region is ready to come back, is ready for tourism, is ready to connect to people, is ready for everything that we have done before. And I'm saying that because when you look for the search in our area from June and August, with the idea to traveling from August to December, we can see that even with closed skies in many countries, we still have people looking for places in Latin America and Caribbean. And so how could we find the way out or the way to bring these people back? Gloria used a word that I believe that this is the key. I mean, the word right now is trust. We need to trust in the system. But how can we trust in the system? I mean, in our system, just if we see the protocols that we have done, not alone, but together with the public sector. Next slide, please. This is the best way to recovery. And that's why we have been talking with each country to keep the protocol that was made together with ICAO. And that I'm not saying about just us, but also the airport. If you go to an airport, you're going to see that we have protocols. If you go to airlines, you're going to see that we have protocols. When you go outside and you go for the hotels, you have protocols. So the way that we see the CART document is the best way to make people trust again in the sector and come back to the system. And saying that, I would like to add that this is actually the reason that we don't see, in a good sense, we don't see reason to request the 14 quarantines. This is not we believe that is not the best way to give confidence for the traveler to come back for the sector. And even if we talk about PCR, we respect, as we respect the 14 days quarantines when the country use that. Even when we talk about the PCR, we don't see reason to do that at the airport. I mean, if some authority, if some government thinks that doing the test or demand the PCR is a good thing to do, we can agree with you in certain point, since we have some propositions to do and to explain the reason why that wouldn't be necessary be done at the airport. But restarting of operation in the European border should be carried out in a harmonized way, and this is 100% right. That's why we, since the beginning of the COVID, we went to ICAO with ACI, with IATA, and the whole countries in order to get this document called CART with layers that we truly believe that has what is necessary to recovery. Next slide, please. Okay, it's the way that we see, as I said, the COVID affected the sector, and I'm not talking about just the tourism, but traveling and the aviation sector. But the way that we see, I really like the way that John Kennedy used to say that when you talk about crisis, you have to take care, because of course there is a danger, but also is opportunity. And I'm saying here opportunity in a good sense, in a good way, because for the first time ever, we could sit with governments all together and try to first find a harmonized solution for the problem, but also we could be able to show what changes that would be necessary for the Latin America and Caribbean to be done in order to get a way out of that with in best conditions. Like when you talk about the regulation framework, try to see what's going on in our infrastructure is very important. When you talk about the prices in the gas, in the fuel, it's very important. So we have many other doors that you have been working with governments in order to use this opportunity to find a way out better than in the beginning. Next slide, please. So with this word, I would like to say thank you and take the floor back to Maribel and wish you all a great event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ricardo. Very interesting. We will have some time later for a Q&A. Again, repeat, if there are questions, you can do it there. Invite the participants and the attendees to do so. So let me now introduce to Jarek Harckham. He is the VP Managing Director of Aviation for ICF. And Jarek will be setting up the stage, sharing with us the effects of COVID-19 in the air service in Latin America and Caribbean, and as well as speak about the customer travel intentions. Thank you very much, Jarek.
Thank you, Maribel, and thank you, Gloria and Jose Ricardo. ICF's a consulting company, but we're also a very proud affiliate member of both WTTC and ALTA, so we're happy to be here today to quickly set the stage for the panel discussion that's coming up. So if we could go to the next one. What we wanted to do is point out to everybody, you know, the situation is so fast moving that we all know economies have shut down, and now some are faster than others recovering. And what has that meant for air service? So on this chart, we're looking at 3 sample countries, China, France, and the United States, and looking at the difference between the domestic flight operations and the international. So the most extreme example there in the red line is China, that in July, according to Flight Radar 24, operated actually 92% of its normal domestic operation. But if you look way down at the bottom, The international is less than 20%. France seemed to be at about half with domestic, but down in the 30% range for international. US, surprisingly, at 50% domestic, but way down at 20% international. So there's still a big dichotomy between the domestic markets that remain fairly closed, as we've been hearing, and the international. This is three global examples. On the next slide, please, Adolfo, we'll see what Latin America is looking like. Here we're only looking at domestic, and you can see that most of the region that we're looking at is at about a quarter of normal levels or below. Mexico is the sole exception, that's close to half, large part due to Volaris and their pretty aggressive flight schedule, but not exclusively, other carriers too. And the reason we think Latin America is still down in this lower range for domestic flights is because, as Gloria mentioned, the virus arrived in the region later. So, you know, they're tracking a little bit behind some of the other markets, but we expect the same kind of recovery. Next one, please. Globally, this is no secret, it's in the press all the time. The airline industry is in a big crisis because of the COVID, and in our region in Latin America and the Caribbean, no different. The important thing, you know, is that both legacy carriers are in restructuring, some of our new entry low-cost carriers, some have disappeared completely, like Liat or Tame. Some are aggressively growing and proceeding with their strategies, like Volaris or JetSmart. But by and large, the important point is that these airlines, all without exception, will be smaller. The fleets will be smaller, fewer numbers of seats, and less appetite for risk. And obviously for tourism, this is a factor, because even though there may be some demand coming back, there may not be all the seats and all the destinations or points of origin that our tourism destinations are used to. The flip side of all of this, restructuring and change of atmospheres, the carriers may emerge from their restructuring in a stronger and more healthy way, which will give them more sustainability for the future. And we certainly hope that we're going to see that. So the next one, please. There's been a lot of talk about the stages of the recovery, so I won't belabor each and every one of these points. You know, the quarantine phase, which we're largely out of, the pre-recovery phase, which we're in clearly, and then what's coming is the recovery phase. So, you know, this has been discussed on this call, so I won't go through each and every point, but a couple of things that are part of the pre-recovery phase. Gloria touched on this, these certifications, the WTTC certification. There's now an ACI certification for airports. So there are all kinds of ways, attempts to standardize, you know, the good practice and communicate that to the industry and to passengers. So that's good. In addition, destinations that we see are doing, you know, best practice jobs of reopening. Los Cabos in Mexico is one, Jamaica is another, and I'm not saying those names to exclude anybody else, but in terms of recovering air service, what they're doing seems to help. On the recovery phase, you know, we're talking about health protocols. San Francisco Airport just announced a 1-hour testing in the airport for all passengers being launched. And interestingly, the CDC in the United States just eliminated their 14-day self-quarantine recommendation for passengers arriving back from trips. So there may be some loosening up of some of these standards. But in any case, the recovery will take a while longer because we do need the hurdles crossed of the vaccine and treatment and more standardization, as we've been hearing. Why don't we go to the next one, please? So ICF interviewed many of our clients and colleague companies in the region, in addition, as part of a global survey. And what we did ask airlines is how long did we expect to recover to pre-COVID levels and once normal flights return. And 80% of the respondents said that, at least 12 months, but more likely, 24 months and more than 24 months to start to see normal traffic levels once the flights had begun. And on the right-hand side, you can see just kind of a similar thing, but in reverse. 2021, how will that look versus pre-pandemic levels? And about half said it will be 30% or more lower than traditional levels. So nobody thinks 2021 is going to be anything like normal. And in a few minutes, we'll see what the longer term trajectory is. Next one, please. What we also found from our interviews of our contacts and clients were some things that we see reflected in the mainstream as well. We do expect passengers to remain, very interested in scrutinizing health conditions in their destination company. There's talk about faster and more widespread adoption of video conferencing, which will affect business travel. But there's also a backlash to that, and I'm one of them, that, you've been spending 6 months on video conferences. You're very anxious to go back to traveling as soon as you can. There's an interesting one where the market was kind of divided, whether people would like more nonstop flights or fewer, and I guess we'll see how that plays out as people get more comfortable flying again. And then, not surprisingly, some reduced demand for conferences and large events, although we may see that sentiment change as people get comfortable traveling again. And again, on the right-hand side, you can see long-term changes to industry practices. Clearly, better hygiene, strict hygiene controls on the aircrafts and in the airports. Some health screenings, such as temperature screenings or the COVID testing in the airports. As I just mentioned, San Francisco has joined a few other airports around the world doing on-the-spot quick testing, so that's a good thing. And I was a little surprised to see that people less than half the people expected that passengers would continue to use protective equipment going forward, but that was the reply. The following slide is a little bit more about business travel, even though we're on a tourism conference, but it still provides context. And in the middle set of graphs, you'll see that 2/3 of the respondents said that their company's travel activity would really only resume to normal or at all when we have a treatment or a vaccine, for the virus. So that's that's pretty telling, and that once the pandemic is over, business travel. Only about half would remain the same, and half said that it would be lower. And again, these are short to medium term opinions, so we would hope to see that change as people get more comfortable. And finally, I think Jose Ricardo showed us this slide earlier as well, the ICF forecast for recovery in Latin America. So really about 3 years to get back into the range of normal and 4 to 5 years to fully recover. And this is all based on the assumption of a cure and a vaccine widely available in the first quarter of 2021. So at the very least, I think we're seeing consensus around the world in many of these things. But it'll be quite interesting now to move on to the panel and hear how they see all these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we have today the opportunity to engage with top executives, and we want to make sure that we are given some time to all of you. Thank you for joining. We have panelists from all over the world, and all of them we have between 3 to 5 minutes to share their views and perspective, and we will finish. We will then move to a Q&A session that again is at the bottom of the screen. So first of all, we like to invite Mr. Roberto Alvo from LATAM Airlines. He's the group CEO. He assumed the role in April 2020 and has more than 18 years experience in the group in LATAM, where he has been previously chief of commercial officer and has held different positions within the group. Welcome, Roberto. Now you have the floor for you and share with us some initial comments. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Very well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Maribel, for the invitation, and thank you very much to everyone for your attendance. With travel and tourism playing such an important role in the region's development and economy, it is definitely essential to restore air connectivity in a safe, timely, and sustainable manner. Unfortunately, the prevalence of the pandemic and the lack of effective transgovernmental coordination have made the recovery of air travel slower in Latin America as compared to other regions in the world. While it is likely that travel will not be completely restored until there's a widespread vaccine or an effective and affordable treatment, things can be done to speed recovery in the upcoming months. I believe to achieve these, two conditions need to be met. The first, passengers should be confident that they can travel safely. The second, governments must be prepared to allow passengers to travel. Regarding consumer confidence, a July IATA survey found that only 45% of the passengers say they will travel again in the first months of the pandemic. However, more than 2/3 said that they will return to traveling when the pandemic subsides. Most airlines have put protocols in place that reduce infection chances. Social distancing at departure and arrival, aircraft cleaning, and mandatory use of masks are some of the most relevant. Little, still, but increasing scientific evidence has emerged that flying is safe. Earlier this month, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology emitted a study that estimated that in a 2-hour flight, infection chance is less than 1 in 4,000. In the particular case of LATAM, as we measured until the end of July, crew that were on LATAM flights where we subsequently found that a passenger was tested positive were quarantined and tested. Over 600 crew members were tested, and we detected 0 infections during the quarantine period. While a bit slowly, there is increasing comfort that getting infected during travel is relatively uncommon, and I believe that this will be overcome soon. However, fear of achieving what they wish to do in their journey becomes more relevant for passengers. In particular, fear of discomfort of quarantines and fear of medical expenses if infected become more relevant factors. While I believe travel insurance can deal with medical expenses and product exists, and I believe that they can be easily developed in a cost-effective manner, I'm much more concerned about quarantine prevalence. In particular, a typical 14-day quarantine are very detrimental to travel. Another recent IATA survey concluded that 85% of passengers would not consider flying because of imposed quarantines. As a first step in the road to return to a seamless travel experience, testing on arrival can greatly diminish this hindrance and can be implemented as a temporary measure. Testing on arrival is already in place in countries in Asia and Europe. Although testing on arrival has challenges, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be fast, affordable, and acceptable to people to be tested. There's good visibility this could be achieved in the short term and can be implemented. The real challenge, in my opinion, is multi-government coordination to accept, institute, and standardize rules for reopening travel and testing protocols. To date, in the region, little progress has been made in opening borders, and I believe that international travel will not resume significantly until governments prioritize these type of measures. Understanding the importance of air travel and tourism for the region, governments in the region must prioritize border opening coordination measures, and I believe that as key stakeholders in the travel and tourism industry, it is our collective responsibility to work with our corresponding governments and urge to take steps in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberto. Well, many very interesting comments you are doing, and I see Gloria's face. I think that she would like to comment. Maybe we can then go to the other panelists, but test on arrival, quarantine, confidence, coordination between government and private sector are totally our key messaging when we talk to governments, and we are very happy that we are hearing that from you as well. Let's come back to this later. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Imon Brennan, Eurocontrol Director General, to give us the view of Europe. Mr. Imon has over 35 years experience working across 3 continents in over 25 countries in both public and private sector. And also absolutely interesting having you today. You can share the European experience. Thank you very much for your time and share the vision.
Good morning, good afternoon, Maribel and colleagues. I won't waste a lot of time. So maybe I'll focus on something just a little bit different from Europe. Just to give you some real-time figures, Eurocontrol manages the European sky for 41 countries, 800 airports, 300 airlines. So we have a lot of real-time data. So today, we were expecting 35,000 flights, and we got 15,871. That's 45% of the traffic that we would have had this time last year. The reality is that the airlines today were reporting load factors of between 50 and 60%, which is significant problems. And also we're facing a situation where there's no long-haul travel other than cargo happening from the continent. And we don't expect long-haul travel to resume to the United States till November, and even longer to Asia Pacific. Some are even saying like Qantas into the first quarter of next year. So we've kind of reached a kind of a peak of activity within Europe. We're stagnating at about 50%. And the outlook for the rest of the year is quite difficult in that some of our major carriers like Ryanair and EasyJet and the network carriers are talking about reductions of 20%, etc. Now, for us, this is not a great idea. This is not good. And a lot of it is brought about by Europe not being as coordinated, perhaps as Gloria might have maybe set out. And I don't mean that in a negative way. We started very well in June. We issued guidelines from EASA. 15 countries opened up on the same day. And basically, in the middle of July, all the wheels started coming off our wagon. Examples would be the United Kingdom, imposing quarantine on visitors from Spain, then imposing quarantine on visitors from France, and then we had local restrictions relating to Barcelona and Galicia, and then we had renewed pandemic outbreaks. So we got over the initial period very well. We got a coordinated focus in place, and then I think we've not managed the resurgence so well because passengers are very nervous. The effect of this on airports has even been more devastating. Even though traffic, is down about 50–55%, passenger loads for the airports are down 80%. So the economics of airports are very, very poor. And we also collect all the cash for the air navigation service providers. And we have a 5 billion black hole in the European air traffic management system. So this has been something that's been really difficult. The governments have been very helpful and the Commission have been very helpful in that we've seen some large bailouts from the States. So you've seen huge cash been pumped into airlines like Air France, KLM, Lufthansa, Alitalia. And this is creating a certain amount of tension within the market because the other carriers, the private carriers like EasyJet, like Ryanair, and also IAG, who have not got state aid, see this as a distortion of the market. So in our single European market, times are very, very difficult at the moment. And what we keep pushing for is the governments to act collectively in a coordinated manner. The problem for us in Eurocontrol, and the same the Commission have, is that if governments operate, and apply different standards, then you get a kind of a hodgepodge of results. And it really is devastating for the European industry, and particularly for airlines. They simply cannot operate when you see actions like the British government imposing a 20-hour notice to everybody in Spain that it's now on the blacklist. So you leave to Spain, you go on your holidays for 2 weeks, then on day 3, you find you can't come back without a 14-day quarantine. Now, I don't want to be overly critical of governments, but it is time to realize that we cannot eradicate this virus from the world. We're going to have to get a vaccine, and you've already discussed it yourselves about testing. But this idea that the vaccine will go away if you keep imposing all of these restrictions is not going to happen. So the issue for Europe is to see, can we educate the population to understand that there has to be local lockdowns, yes, there has to be all the normal precautions, yes, and the aviation industry is really good. You have a very small chance of getting COVID on an airplane, but the reality is the governments do not act this way. And what we're finding in Europe, and I'll finish on this, and this is a consensus throughout the continent, is that most of the governments in Europe, and I don't mean to be critical of them all, but it is frustrating at this stage, have been captured by the health professionals. And having been captured by the health professionals, it's like when you ground the 737 MAX. It's easy to ground the aircraft. It's much more difficult to give the reason why you put it back flying. So it's easy to close your schools, it's easy to close your industry, and this having a devastating effect on the European economy. And maybe just to finish, I would say that travel and tourism is what we're talking about here, but there's all kinds of people who run small cafes, little businesses, industries that are, that are dependent on tourism, taxi drivers. This is something that the downward effect of this will be happen for years to come. We don't believe in Europe we will recover from this till 2024. So I would say that in Latin America and generally, I know you've had a pretty hard time, but believe me, Europe is not the 100% solution either. We are struggling the same way that you were struggling, and if we knew the answer, and if I knew the answer, then maybe we would have an answer very quickly. But just do your best, and we will help every way that we can in Europe, but it is very tricky. Thank you, Maribel.
Thank you for your recommendation. I'm going to give to Gloria 1 or 2 minutes because I know that she will like to comment on the last two, your participation and the other one, and maybe we can carry on. I think it's very important that we give some background here. Gloria, are you happy?
Well, I couldn't agree more with the quarantines, and unfortunately the silo decisions that the UK government has made has had a significant impact, and that's what I try to say with other words. We don't agree with the quarantines. We don't agree with the measures taken, especially because what you mentioned, in the case of France and Spain, they took them by surprise. It was not in a coordinated way. Europe has started very good, as it was mentioned in June, the reopening, and unfortunately, that fall to the cracks with the quarantines and the lack of coordination. We don't see that coordination even with the leaders within the EU zone. I mean, forget about UK and some others. That is the challenge that we're facing. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And the other one in the testing, just very quick, we believe in testing on departure is ideal because testing on departure will isolate the infected people. However, it's almost very hard to do that if there is no trust among governments, if there's not an international framework. That's why governments are imposing testing on arrival as a solution. But a quick test, a cheap test, less than $10, that you can get the results in 60 minutes or less, and with a high efficacy, is possible, as we have seen in some markets, that I can apply the test before I fly, and if I tested positive, they don't allow me to fly. But if I test negative, then I should be fine. And 99% of the travelers are negative. And as you would say before, the chances of getting the virus in the plane are almost none. You have more chance to catch the virus in the supermarket buying your groceries or in other places. But anyway, very good interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gloria. Moving now to our third participant, a member of WTTC, Mr. Hugo Denzezani, Libertador Hotels CEO. Of course, it's important to have today with us not only aviation, but as well the other part of the value chain. Hugo has been previously Vice President of Hotel Development for Marriott within the region and responsible and overseeing the expansion for over 30 Marriott brands. So thank you very much, Hugo, for joining us today and share your vision with us.
Thank you, Maribel, and thank you to the WTTC and ALTA for allowing me to represent my fellow hoteliers in this distinguished forum. I'll try not to repeat many of the things that have been said, but as hoteliers, many times we're not so exposed to the issues that are being explained in this panel. So I'd like to go back for a second and briefly try to explain where we think we are, why we think it's important to push the travel agenda, and finally, what do we think needs to be done. So first, we identified when the COVID started as a phase 1, as the time where we didn't know much about it. There was many theories. We had no end in sight. We went through a wear masks to a don't wear masks to back to wearing masks for the first couple of months of the pandemic. And then we reached what phase 2 is, where we think we are now. We know much more about the pandemic. We know we have a deeper knowledge in general about what helps, what doesn't help, what's riskier, what's less riskier. We have a consensus that the medical community has a consensus that there's going to be a vaccine towards the end of the year and maybe massified towards the first months of 2021. With that in mind, we also came to the conclusion as a community that it's better a mitigation than a suppression strategy. Suppression meaning let's close everything and avoid infections, killing the economy. Mitigation meaning let's try to bring the contagion down, but also keep some of the economy running. We all know, especially in this region, that poverty and recessions also kill people. So we came to the conclusion that we need to reactivate the economy. We need to keep the economy running, and we need to take steps to do it as safe as possible. And that's where travel comes in. Travel can be a safe experience if you follow the protocols, and it also has a huge contribution to the economy, not only in tourism and hospitality and travel, but also it fosters foreign direct investment, and it also helps people psychologically take vacation, relaxes them, reduces stress. Most companies have reported that people are not taking vacation during the pandemic, and we're facing a year without vacation. So and people don't take vacations because they cannot travel. So think for a second, what can a year without any time off do to your people? So we're very concerned about that, and we think it needs to be addressed. There's a lot of distrust. I think the three main reasons why governments oppose opening traveling. There's a lot of distrust about what can be happening in other countries. Second, because the virus came through our airports, they may think that traveling is actually a way that the disease can spread. And thirdly, because some countries are concerned about their medical capacity, and the last thing they want is to import sick people. There's ways to counter all three of them. We heard from Roberto about studies that have to do with how safe travel is, but it needs to be holistic. It needs to be the entire travel journey. It's not only about flying, it's about the taxi, the hotel, the attraction, the flea market, or whatever a tourist wants to be at. And it also needs to be universal. It cannot be on some regions and some regions not. It cannot be on some areas of a country and some areas not. It has to be universal at the country level, at the industry level, and at the world level. Some of us have used cleanliness as a competitive advantage versus the other hotels. I'm always against that. I think cleanliness we all should be clean. And if I try to out-clean my competitors, what ends up gonna happening is that I'm gonna confuse our guests, and they're gonna wanna know whether the hotel is clean or not clean, and should I travel, should I not travel. Let's find a way, maybe through the WTTC, to have one certification, unify what is the travel journey, make it clean, make it safe, make it simple to understand for the traveler, because that's the only way that we're going to bring people back to travel. And how to deal with governments thinking that traveling makes people more vulnerable to the disease. The statistics that Roberto showed, once again, make it throughout the traveler journey. And how to deal with importing sick people. Well, there's insurance out there that we can have for some countries where you can actually fly back home somebody that's sick. So that's from my end. Thank you once again for inviting me.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you very much for your point of view and bringing us the hotelier perspective and the holistic approach. Now we have two more speakers, Julián Guerrero, as Vice Minister of Tourism of Republic of Colombia, and then we have another one, which is Mr. Miguel Leitman, Vision Box CEO, which will be speaking later, as we are a little bit behind time. I'm going to give the time to both of the speakers and do the question as we go. Julián, thank you for joining today. Julián Guerrero has been working for the public sector for over more than 20 years, and you have experience in different positions, both in Colombia and abroad. Of course, having you here today with us will bring us here the voice of the government. So please share with you where you are up to, but at the same time, what the government has to do in this situation. What are your opinion and vision? Thank you very much, Julián, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Maribel, and a hi to everybody, to Gloria, to the different speakers that preceded me, and also to my fellow panelists. I think that the discussion so far has been very interesting, and I would like to bring the perspective from the example of Colombia, but I believe it could be the same challenges that different governments are facing in the region. So to start with, I think we're moving from a phrase of isolation, quarantine with exceptions, to a stage where we have openness with some restrictions, but now the restrictions are becoming the exception, whereas before the exception was the openness of the tourism sector. We in Colombia, and I guess in several other countries, we already have hotels allowed to operate without distinction if the municipalities or cities are no COVID or high COVID. Tour operators are also allowed to operate and sell their services, as well as the travel industry. We have in this situation, we have only pilot routes that can operate with an authorization by the Ministry of Interior, but we hope that as of 1st of September, we will move to the first stage of the reactivation of the air travel industry. We have been working throughout this 5 months of the pandemic in preparing ourselves for the reactivation process. And I have to say that I prefer to use reactivation than recovery, because this is also an opportunity, and we should not aspire to be back in the same situation that we have in January this year. There's an opportunity to have a better type of tourism, a tourism of the future. And I think we have to have that mindset to make sure we reap the benefits of something that is terrible, but we need to take advantage of. So we need to think as well in the short, middle, and long-term strategy. And we need to think not only in the short term. Of course, the anguish that governments, people, enterprises have make us focus mainly on the short term, but that's not the only thing we have to think about. In the short term, I think that, as José Ricardo rightly pointed out, the main word is trust. How to build trust. Because hypothetically or practically, we could be in a situation where in the future, it doesn't matter if it's a week, days, or months, the whole tourism sector will be open. Let's think in a situation where all the travel industry is allowed to travel, but then the biggest challenge will be to increase demand, because customers and travelers might not be in a good position to demand and consume tourism services. And there is where we have to work the most. And one of those aspects to work is as you rightly had mentioned before, the biosafety protocols. But we have done something particularly in Colombia that we believe is on the right track. And we have designed a biosafety certification or stamp. And we have used the conformity assessment bodies, organizations like SGS, like Bureau Veritas, like BBQI, and that sort, that operate pretty much worldwide. We believe that they are an independent third party with the qualifications necessary to get that certification. And I think that through them, countries find common ground to adopt similar standards in terms of the biosafety measures. Already very important companies like Avianca, like LATAM, like Viva Air, a large group of hotels have adopted the stamp, and it's proven to help build trust. But in the long term, I think that the main aspect that we need to think about is sustainability. Sustainability is not any longer responsibility for future generations. It's not love for nature, philanthropy. It's a definitive aspect of competitiveness of destinations. And we are investing also heavily there. On one hand, we are working on the first sustainable tourism policy in Colombia that we should present in September. And on the other hand, we are presenting a bill to Congress this same week the main aspect of which is sustainability. I think that there is a huge opportunity, and I think to a large extent, the winners will be those destinations that invest highly on sustainability in comparison to those that don't. You know, the accountability that governments have, it's different from the accountability that a company, an association, an airline, and travel agency has. And I understand the big frustration, and coming from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Commerce, we are the ones that have been pressing very, very hard inside the government to reopen the economy and specifically the tourism industry. But we should not lose account of the fact that we need to balance that with the health aspect of it. You know, we are already seeing in countries in Europe, for example, that they are considering measures to close again. So I don't want to convey the idea that we are not in favor of opening. We, as I said, we are the ones that have been pressing that the hardest. But also we need to take into account so that we adopt the appropriate and balanced measures to make sure that we can conduct travel activities, but with a high degree of safety and health precautions. Thank you.
Thank you, Julián. I think we all think that is very important, and thanks for your explanation. We take it, we understand, but the coordination between countries, because that is what ultimately will give to the customer the confidence and the trust, and of course, to be able to coordinate and the balance between economy and health. And now, please, I'd like to introduce Mr. Miguel Leitman. He's the CEO of Vision Box, as well as a fellow member of WTTC. He's the founder of the company, where he joined in 2003, and has been a key player in entering into new markets and developing new security products based on biometric identification technology. So welcome, Miguel. You have as well 3 to 5 minutes to explain, and I'm not sure we are going to have a lot of time for questions, but still the chat is open, so we can all try to do 5 minutes afterwards. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Maribel. Thank you for introducing, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this initiative. Very interesting contents and topics. I will keep myself quite short, and I will try to speak here from the context of a provider of contactless and seamless solutions. I think, as the topic suggests, it is becoming, and it has become since COVID, a buzzword. One of the key elements, seamless technologies, to build that trust and to bring back the passengers to the airports. It's important to highlight that we have been implementing these technologies since 2015. Not by coincidence, the first deployment was done in Aruba, in a cooperation between Aruba authorities, Aruba Airport, the Dutch authorities, KLM and Schiphol. And at that time, the main intention of the seamless technologies was meant to increase speed, safety, security due to increase of passenger numbers. It is quite interesting that right now, seamless is the solution, or is meant to be the solution, to bring back passengers to the airports and implement safety elements that bring back that trust. As a supplier, and just giving you an idea, early this year we had about 80 projects in activity, from which 40 were dedicated to deployments in seamless technologies around the world. I think airlines and airports, our customers, have understood the social element and the social responsibility they have in being a key element in preventing that further pandemic spreads. Will deploy again. I think airlines and airports are the element where these pandemics are being spread. So we have not been, canceled any of these projects. Despite budget limitations, projects were delayed, descoped, implemented in the longer time frame. But we continue heavily involved in implementing and deploying this kind of solutions. Let me give you a little bit of highlights of what we understand by seamless today. Basically, it's understanding the processes of passenger handling, automating it, As Gloria mentioned earlier, it's not about inventing new processes. I think all the stakeholders, they have the right processes in place, automating them, but is creating means of automation and making sure that stakeholders collaborate. I think this is the biggest element and the biggest challenge to bring airlines, airports, governments, border authorities actually together to collaborate and to share data. And data does not mean only identity. You know, there's an immensity of efficiencies that you can build by information and events that you generate out of data. And you know, normally a seamless project takes about 18 to 24 months to deploy. So we did not see, despite the COVID impact, that any of those projects has been eliminated. So to bring back all the trust elements that were identified earlier, it's not only bringing back or putting together the stakeholders in the collaboration, it's also raising the passenger himself as a potential stakeholder in the ecosystem. He needs to be in control. He needs to feel that he can travel and have an experience in a very safe environment. So we need to build measures and implement in our solution ways that he is considered as a stakeholder and in control. Because a lot of the processes, you have to understand that seamless also means identifying passengers in a universe of many thousands, many millions. It is very important to understand how to spread the processes between the touch points. For example, a check-in kiosk or a boarding gate, it's a touch point. It's very important to understand which kind of processes to implement at the touch point and which ones are to be implemented in the backend system. So I just highlighted 6-7 points that have a very big impact on the solution, on the costs, on the implementation of seamless technologies. The next point is actually the device itself, the kiosk, the touch point, which everybody mentions has to be contactless. The passenger should not be in the need to touch it. But for us, touchless means actually getting rid of touch points. The less touch points we can implement, the more efficient the solution gets, and the better and more efficient the experience of the passenger is. The glue of all of these processes is, of course, biometrics. It's a key element that brings all of these processes and steps together, and that's what needs to be implemented in the proper way. So that would be my contribution on the seamless part, on the seamless implementation. We are in the process of deploying and continuing to involve with our customers, airlines, and airports around the world. It's very visible on our side as a supplier of the solutions, how much interested and how much responsibility the airlines and the airports do see in their part to making this solution possible, deploying it as quick as they can to bring back trust and bring back the passengers to the airports and into the airlines.
Thank you very much for your presentation, your exposition about how important are the biometrics and how will be. We have still some minutes for Q&A before maybe I go and move to Gloria and José, Ricardo for a sort of wrap up if we have time. But I would like to do a question to Mr. Alvo. Mr. Alvo, how do you see the future of the airlines and how the connectivity is going to be impacted in your region? I mean, honestly, how this will be looking at what we have been sharing today.
Yes, I think that this will be a long and slow recovery process for airlines. Internally, we don't expect that we will see traffic returning to pre-COVID levels until 2023 or 2024. 2020 and 2021 are going to be particularly hard, and recovery will definitely depend on if there's a good treatment or a vaccine available. And connectivity will suffer. Many pairs of cities that we were starting to connect that are hubs to secondary cities or secondary cities to secondary cities like Santiago to Cusco, for example, flights that could be really good for tourism, I think will take some time to come back to normal. Domestic markets will definitely recover faster. International travel will be much slower, as everybody, I think, considers. So we are not very optimistic in the recovery of air travel on the next 18 months. But it will be definitely a really difficult process. So definitely it's a great opportunity to rethink the company, to reduce cost, and to use this hibernation period to be better as an airline. But unfortunately, I think that we will suffer as airlines and as tourism system for a few months still.
Wow, thank you. So, Mr. Brennan, so what else could be done? Because you are the expert, you are in Europe, you have all this visibility. Of course, there is not a receipt to share with everyone here, but we were discussing before about the good things and the bad things, and what are the best practices, and what would you aim for? Could be shared here today. Thank you.
Hi, Maribel. From a European point of view, most of the technology solutions that you've mentioned there, we're deploying them in Europe. But I really would like to go back to the political dimension. The most important thing to get aviation moving in Europe again is consistency of standards between all the member states in the European Union and also the wider European family. That's ranging from Turkey right through to the UK. So that even though individual states, can have very good COVID testing, can have very good processes, unless we've got uniformity of application, this becomes very difficult. Now, when we're looking at a pandemic situation where the virus is by and large consistent, then it's very strange to see why we cannot get consistency of application. I mean, yesterday I spoke with the CEO of Ryanair, and he told me that you simply cannot run a business if governments keep chopping and changing requirements in a very short period of time. The passengers get nervous, they will not book. And at the moment he was telling me that the outlook for Europe for November, December isn't good because of the lack of predictability. So we're very strong on supporting airlines and airports, but we need the governments to agree standards and then to stick to the standards, and also to give confidence to people to travel. Because what's amazing is that there are some countries in Europe actively discouraging travel at the moment. Meanwhile, their pubs are open. Meanwhile, their restaurants are open, which is good. All of these type of things are happening, and they don't see the fact that the airports have done such a huge job in making COVID safe, with social distancing, all of the proper things. So all I would say to you is to back to basics. Governments have a role to play here, and the role is to apply the standards consistently. And if that's done in Europe, and I imagine in South America, we would have a much better line. I would not like to have the job that Roberto has there running an airline, because you don't know from one day to the next what the situation is, and it's very difficult to even stay solvent in that kind of situation. So best of luck.
Thank you very much. It's all about consistency, coordination. So we have a lot of questions in the chat. I'm afraid we have only a couple of minutes, but the questions are all related to cooperation and coordination. What is the role of the government? What is the post-COVID will be looking like? So I would like to wrap up, give a couple of minutes to Gloria and then to José Ricardo to close the day of today. It has been really good. I think we needed more time to continue this conversation. It's a good start. So maybe we could have this conversation in a couple of months and see where we are versus where we are right now. So I'll give the voice to Gloria and then to José Ricardo for wrapping up. Thank you very much to all of you. Gloria, please, if you want to say something.
Thank you, Maribel. And what I would like to also actually propose, as a lot of what is needed is coordination. Julián, for instance, from Colombia has done a great job coordinating among the region. I would like to propose perhaps to have a follow-up session where Julián can invite some other government fellows from the region, and at the same time, Roberto and others, and can invite also an ALTA, José Ricardo, some airlines from the region, and we can have the discussion with the private sector and the public sector and be very specific of the next steps and what is needed, and perhaps open that to the floor. This has been very interesting. I think the region has an opportunity to leapfrog and learn from what has been done in Europe, as the head of the Eurocontrol already mentioned. A lot of lessons learned from Europe, a lot of lessons learned from hospitality, as Hugo was mentioned. I want to thank everyone. This was very helpful. And hopefully this is just the beginning of how do we help the region, how do we help Latin America together to leapfrog and recover after the restart and move faster out of this challenging situation, so that we can bring back the millions of jobs already impacted. Thank you for all the support, and thank you for participating. And now back to you.
Thank you, José Ricardo. Please, some words. Thank you.
Thank you. I just like to say thank you for audience, thank you for our panelists, and of course for this partnership with WTTC. It was a great pleasure in the event. We learned a lot. The way that we see the main message that I would like to leave here is that actually when you talk about this sector, when you're talking about airlines, when you talk about airports, when you're about to talk the tourism and traveling sector, I believe that the best way to bring back the trust of this magical world that is so important right now is saying that we are not vectors. We are not vectors. There is a protocol that was made with the governments, and I mean ICAO, and the private sector, with layers in order to give some confidence for the passenger. So with that, I would like just to end saying that this is a troubled water, this is a troubled moment, but we are like a bridge. And I believe that like a bridge over troubled water, it's necessary. Stand by all and each passengers, stand by for all and each traveler. Help them to cross this moment. This is very important. This is quite new for all of us. So thank you very much in ALTA's name.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So sorry we didn't finish all the many questions that we have here, but as Gloria mentioned, we will be doing a second session very soon and let you know when this will be. Thank you very much, all the participants, and best of luck. Thank you. Gracias.